Imagine waking up tomorrow morning, turning on the news, and seeing a headline that says foreign forces have launched a full-scale invasion of the United States. Not a cyber attack, not a missile strike, not a limited conflict somewhere overseas, but a real invasion with boots on the ground. Troops landing on American beaches, warships off the coast, aircraft entering U.S. airspace. It sounds like something out of a movie, but it raises a serious question. Could anyone actually invade the United States? And more importantly, would America survive? When you really break it down, the United States might be one of the hardest countries in history to conquer. And to understand why, we have to look at geography, military power, logistics, and something uniquely American, the people themselves. First, we need to understand what a full-scale invasion really means. This wouldn't be a small attack or a quick strike. A true invasion means landing hundreds of thousands of troops, bringing tanks, aircraft, supplies, and then holding territory. But the United States is enormous. It stretches across nearly 4 million square miles and has more than 330 million people spread across 50 states. Even if an enemy managed to land troops, they wouldn't just need to win battles. They would need to control cities, highways, infrastructure, and populations. History shows us that invading a country is one thing, but occupying it is much harder. And occupying the United States would be a challenge unlike anything the world has ever seen. Geography alone makes invading America incredibly difficult. The United States is protected by two massive oceans, the Atlantic to the east and the Pacific to the west. These aren't small bodies of water, they're thousands of miles wide. Any invading force would need to transport soldiers, tanks, ammunition, food, and fuel across those oceans, and they would have to do it while being detected. Unlike smaller countries that share borders with rivals, the United States is separated from potential enemies by distance. Canada borders the north, and Mexico borders the south, and neither represents a staging ground for a hostile superpower invasion. This means any enemy would need to launch a massive amphibious operation across open water, which is one of the hardest military operations in existence. And that leads directly to the next major obstacle, the United States Navy. The U.S. Navy is widely considered the most powerful naval force in history. It operates aircraft carriers, destroyers, submarines, and amphibious assault ships across the globe. Aircraft carriers alone function like floating air bases, capable of launching fighter jets anywhere in the world. To invade America, an enemy fleet would have to cross oceans already patrolled by American submarines, satellites, and surveillance systems. Long before invading ships reached U.S. shores, they would likely be detected and intercepted. Naval battles would occur thousands of miles away from the mainland, making it extremely difficult for an invasion force to even get close. But even if an enemy somehow made it across the ocean, the next challenge would be controlling the skies. Air superiority is essential for any invasion. Without control of the air, troop transports, ships, and ground forces become extremely vulnerable. The United States Air Force, combined with naval aviation and Marine Corps aviation, makes up one of the largest and most advanced air power networks in the world. Fighter jets, stealth bombers, drones, and surveillance aircraft operate from bases across the country. Any invading force would first need to defeat U.S. air power, which would likely involve massive air battles and long-range strikes. That alone could stop an invasion before it even began. Let's assume for a moment that enemy troops actually land on American soil. That's when the situation becomes even more difficult for the invader. The United States military is not concentrated in just one area. Bases are spread across the country, from California and Texas to Florida, Virginia, Alaska, and Hawaii. Army units, Marine units, National Guard forces, and reserves could mobilize quickly. Because the fighting would be happening inside the United States, American forces would have shorter supply lines and faster reinforcements. Aircraft could take off from nearby bases, and troops could be moved by highways, rail, and domestic air transport. In other words, the invader would be fighting deep inside the defender's home territory, which is one of the toughest military scenarios possible. There's also something unique about the United States that makes occupation even harder: civilian gun ownership. The United States has hundreds of millions of privately owned firearms. In a hypothetical invasion, this wouldn't mean every civilian becomes a soldier, but it would create widespread resistance. Historically, occupying forces struggle when local populations resist. Even if major cities were captured, controlling smaller towns, rural areas, and transportation routes would be extremely difficult. Resistance movements could disrupt supply lines, gather intelligence, and slow down occupying forces. This kind of decentralized resistance has challenged even the strongest militaries in history. Another major factor is the sheer size of the country. Even if an invading force captured major cities like New York, Los Angeles, or Chicago, that wouldn't mean victory. The United States contains mountains, deserts, forests, and vast rural regions. Controlling all of that territory would require enormous manpower. An invading army would need to secure roads, infrastructure, power grids, and communication systems across thousands of miles. This stretches supply lines and forces troops to spread out, making them vulnerable. The bigger the country, the harder it is to control, and the United States is one of the largest. Logistics would become the biggest nightmare. Armies don't just fight, they consume resources constantly. Troops need food, water, fuel, ammunition, and medical support every day. For an invading force, all of those supplies would need to come from overseas. That means ships crossing oceans repeatedly while being targeted. If those supply lines were disrupted, invading troops could quickly run out of essential resources. Many invasions in history have failed not because of battlefield losses, but because supply chains collapsed. In the case of the United States, maintaining supply lines across oceans while under attack would be extremely difficult. There's also the factor of nuclear deterrence. The United States possesses nuclear weapons and advanced missile systems. Any full-scale invasion of American territory risked escalation to a nuclear conflict. This alone discourages countries from attempting such an operation. The potential consequences would be catastrophic, not just for the countries involved, but for the entire world. Because of this, large-scale invasions between nuclear powers are considered extremely unlikely. So could anyone invade the United States? Technically, almost anything is possible, but realistically, it would be extraordinarily difficult. An invading force would need to cross oceans, defeat the U.S. Navy, gain air superiority, land troops, overcome American military forces, manage long supply lines, control a massive population, and maintain occupation across a huge territory. No country today has demonstrated the ability to do all of that. That doesn't mean the United States is invulnerable, but it does mean a full-scale invasion would be one of the most difficult military operations ever attempted. In the end, the United States is protected not just by its military, but by geography, size, logistics, and its population. Invading America wouldn't just be another war, it would be a global-scale operation with enormous risks. And that's why, even though the idea of invading the United States makes for dramatic headlines and interesting discussions, the reality is that such an invasion would be incredibly unlikely. The real question isn't just whether America could survive a full-scale invasion. The real question is whether anyone would ever attempt something so difficult in the first place.